Boy, that came out wrong.
You know, there is just no good way to answer that question. That doesn't sound obscene at this point, thanks to you all. Well done.
You play online games.
I play online games with ex-students, but not with current students. So, why do I play with ex-students? Because they kick my ass on the game. Sometimes it's nice to kick their ass back after they've drove me nuts for the entire semester.
No, why don't you?
Why don't I play games with games? Well, because in general, if I have to like flunk you, that seems to be unkind, you know, and there is, at least, and while I'm very approachable, I like to think there is some distance between professor and student, and there are many times that after being a student, you can become the friend of professors, and that's great, but while you're a student, there's still that power differential, and while there's a power differential, it is a little weird on both sides, and so it seems most appropriate, so generally I try not to, I only give out my online handles and whatnot after somebody has passed my class. But after that, it's fair game, and then you can pwn me online if you wish. You know, I do get pwned a lot, assholes. Anyway, it's like, what was that? I don't know. The other team, they keep on going for that guy. What's up? Don't ask. I'm just gonna hide in base. You know. Anyway, the point of the story, before we got derailed by playing with students, apparently, the point of the story was that communications and transportation can really shrink the world. The ability to go upstream in the major rivers. I mean, within 10 years of the Claremont sailing up the Hudson River, you have an amazing transformation where you're having people sailing up the Mississippi River. And it opens up the doors to the West. It opens up the doors to expansion. It changes everything in the United States. Between that and the canal building that's being done following the War of 1812, the world is just opening up in the United States, and it brings us closer together. And every time we have an advancement in the technology of transportation, one thing you'll probably notice is that we tend to romanticize transportation, and we tend to adopt it as a sign of freedom. And this is really kind of interesting. But I mean, if you think about it, when we first had the riverboat, how many people have read Mark Twain in the I Didn't Actually Replace the Words edition? Okay, but if you read Mark Twain, of course, even the name Mark Twain, where does that come from? Yeah, it's a riverboat name, right? It was Samuel Langhorne Clemens Mark Twain. It's a measurement of the water. And he romanticizes the idea of the riverboat. We have these riverboat gamblers and the people escaping on the riverboats in order to go to a different life. There's a romanticization of it. Do people still in the modern day romanticize cars and motorcycles as symbols of freedom? Do we, for example, for people in the military, is there not something romantic about the fighter pilot? Isn't there a certain prestige for the faster you can go, the higher you can go, the Top Gun, right, moment that you have? We talked about how in the railway, we still have this idea of hopping the railway, being able to go anywhere, even all the terms you said of the final destination, all that. There's a romanticization of transport, that particularly when that is the newest form of transport, we tend to adopt it as a sign of freedom. And freedom, well, okay, maybe not the Segway scooter, but still, for the most part, and even, God forbid, I mean, this sounds funny, but for those who are around in the 70s and 80s, for example, there was a big thing about roller skating. And there is a romanticization of roller skating culture, including like the very 80s artifact movie Xanadu. And to what? Olivia Newton-John, of course, was important, but it's similarly, it hasn't still for skateboarding. Isn't there still sort of romanticization of the skateboard culture and skate culture, right? Even whole clothing lines and all this. Transportation changes the way we associate an advancement in transportation with freedom. So it's a very interesting cultural idea that seeps in. Now, tied to this actually is, as we get closer to the Civil War, in the 1850s, the mass production of steel. Now, iron had been used as the primary component for a number of things, and steel was known. Steel had been known for years and years and years, but making steel was a laborious, pain-in-the-ass process. For example, to make a good steel sword, there's a folding process that's done, but to actually fold and temper a steel sword could take literally weeks, or depending on the quality of the time, it could be months if it was a suit of armor or something. This was not in any ways mass production. William Kelly found a way that by blowing oxygen through the molten lead, and then molten iron, pardon me, lead, apparently I'm transmuting here, by blowing the oxygen to the molten iron and then adding the other components that would actually alloy into steel, that steel could be mass produced. Why is steel so important? Why is it such a big deal?
It's a lot stronger than iron.
Okay, what else?
Lighter.
And?
More durable.
Huh?
More durable.
How so?
Iron cracks easier, rusts.
Okay, iron is more brittle, iron rusts, and there's one other component we're forgetting about it, but very important about steel. Well, that's cool. It's flexible, and that's a big deal. It's a big deal for things like transportation, as we already said, the creation of the railroads. Obviously, if you have a pothole in the road, you can avoid the pothole. If you have a track that one section's out, you're going to get a very long-ass vacation when the train runs off it, right? And it's really a long time to wait for AAA to come by, because they wouldn't be around for another 100 years. So quite a big problem there. Now, the flip side of that would be, if on the one hand, transportation moving along, architecture changes tremendously because of steel. Because with iron frame buildings can go to about 3 stories, and after that, the internal pressures of the building would cause it to collapse. Not a good thing. Now, with steel frame buildings, what could you do? You could build amazingly high. How many of you all have ever been up to these giant buildings like the Sears Tower, the Empire State Building, any of the other ones? I know it's not the Sears Tower anymore, but that was what we called it when we were kids.
It's not?
What is it called now? Does anyone know?
I didn't know. I thought it was only the Sears Tower.
It was, but no, it was bought out by somebody else. Now it's no longer Sears Tower.
Really?
Yeah, it's very disappointing.
When?
Sears Tower was, for a while, the tallest building in the United States. It's in Chicago.
Yeah.
But anyway, if you ever go up to the top of one of these very tall buildings, what do you notice? It's kind of freaky deaky.
They move.
It moves! Okay? Buildings should be built, not movings. Okay? And yet you're going, holy rock, it's scary. And I was a kid in Chicago. I lived out of Palatine, and we went to, and this is a field trip, and I still don't, I can only imagine that the parents must have afterwards thought this would be like the most fucking stupid idea for little kids. First of all, they took us to the Chicago Tribune to see how newspapers were made, which is kind of a cool educational experience, except, so the newspapers trying to figure out what would be kind of cool to give the kids. There'd be like a souvenir, but cheap ass, okay? And so what they did was, you know the little movable type that you use on the newsprint? Of course, you can only use it so long and then it wears out. So what they did was that they had literally these boxes of old lead newsprint, the little news types, which they figured, well, what the fuck? And so they actually gave each kid like a letter or 3 letters, and that's like, so one, they were giving out lead, which is cool, and number 2, all their shit still had ink on it. And so, the kids, we're all like, 7 to 11 years old. Yeah. We're coming out there looking like the coal miner's daughter, and of course, we're all in our Sunday best because it's an outing, and then off we go to the Sears Tower, and we go up to the Sears Tower, and we're already kind of short anyway. We go in like a giant elevator, and it's like, and our faces, because that's some G-force when you're that short, and you get up there. And I don't know what genius designed these things, but I still remember that. So they say, "Here, kids, come have a look." And so you look out the glass window, and you're looking down, like, oh, and Clouds are below you. They're not supposed to be below you. They're supposed to be